Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Denis Karasyov. I am the director and co-founder of EB-5 Expert. Today we have here with us our longtime partner and my good friend, Ekaterina Kalmykova. She's an immigration attorney at Greenberg Traurig. Great to have you here, Kate. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Kate, so today we're going to dive into the EB-5 program and take a good, in-depth look at it. There are a lot of questions about this program, so we've got a lot to cover today. But before we get started, I'd like to take a moment and properly introduce you to our viewers. We've been friends for about 12 years now, since 2012, I think. And we worked closely with your law firm in the US since then as well. But I know you've got a lot more to share about yourself, your professional career, and your firm's work. Thank you, Denis. I've been working with the EB-5 program for about 20 years now. I'm the head of the immigration practice at Greenberg Traurig, which is one of the largest law firms in the world. And we have a strong global immigration practice. We handle EB-5 cases, but we also work on employment visas, help companies establish themselves in the US, and we also assist with family reunification. So we have an extensive experience in immigration law. We have a very large team of highly skilled attorneys and paralegals, and we've got offices in 84 different locations around the world. That's very impressive. I know you've recently opened an office in the UAE, where we're talking today, and in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, we have offices in Saudi Arabia and in Dubai. We've built a strong practice here, and we can support our clients from Dubai, Riyadh, and this entire region. Fantastic! I read somewhere, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're ranked among the top 25 immigration attorneys in the US. Is that right? That's right. That's really something. Thank you. Kate, could you give us a quick rundown of what the EB-5 program is all about? Sure. The EB-5 program is unique because it's one of the very few US immigration pathways where individuals can sponsor themselves, their spouse, and their children for a green card through an investment in a US business. The business, with a total investment of $800,000, has to create 10 jobs. And in return, the investor gets to live and work in the US, travel freely, plus their children can benefit from in-state tuition rates, which can be much more affordable. And after holding a green card for 5 years, they become eligible to apply for US citizenship. That's great. So we can say that an investor who invests through the EB-5 program essentially becomes a US citizen as soon as they get their green card. Is that right? Well, we could say so. They still have to formally apply for citizenship later, but they have the right to do so. And once they get their citizenship, they can sponsor their parents and other family members to come to the US through family reunification. Excellent. My company and I have been based in Russia for many years. But now, our office is located here, in Dubai. However, our main clients for the EB-5 program are still primarily from post-Soviet space. Most of our clients are actually from Russia, meaning they hold Russian citizenship. So, Kate, here is a question. Can Russian citizens participate in the EB-5 program today, in 2024? Absolutely. They absolutely can, and they should, if they're looking to move to the US. It's the easiest and most straightforward way. Plus, in 2022, the EB-5 law was revised to make the process much faster and simpler. You can even apply while you're in the US now. For example, if you have a child studying at a US university, they can apply from there. They don't have to go through the embassy process overseas. They can apply for both the green card and the EB-5 at the same time. Yeah, before you had to be outside of the US to apply. Right, the process is much more streamlined now. I bring this up because today in 2024, when we talk to potential investors, we often hear concerns that due to the political situation, Russian citizens are banned from participating in this program. Actually, that's not the case. I know some European programs have closed their doors, but the US has never done that. In fact, it would be illegal to ban people from a specific country from applying for the US immigration. When our President Trump tried to prohibit citizens from certain Muslim countries from applying to US immigration programs, the Supreme Court ruled that it was actually illegal. Well, that makes sense. After all, the US is a nation built by immigrants. I also know that even the citizens of Iran, for example, can participate in the EB-5 program, even though Iran has been under sanctions for many years. Yeah, I actually work with many people from Iran, including Iranians who are based in Dubai. That's great. Kate, could you walk us through the main options available in the EB-5 program? From what I know, this program is quite complex and has a lot of details. But since we are talking about an investment program, what are the primary investment options? What is typically considered an investment? In this program, we're mainly dealing with various companies that raise funds from foreign investors to finance commercial real estate projects. Typically, this means real estate like hotels, condo projects, stadiums, or apartment complexes. So they set up a fund, and that fund lends money to a developer who's building one of these large estate projects in the US. Got it. So, am I correct in understanding that the majority of projects in the EB-5 program are specifically real estate projects? Exactly, I'd say about 99%. Okay, but are there any projects in other industries? Yes, there are businesses under what we call direct EB-5, which are not done through a regional center. These could be restaurants, franchises, tech companies, and the like. But they must still create 10 jobs per investor. In regional centers, the jobs don't have to be created directly by the project itself. They just have to show that the project will create jobs when they present its budget. And the immigration service then approves it based on the job creation estimates. The system is much simpler because, let's say you have a restaurant. You'd have to create 10 jobs per each investor, which can be quite challenging. That means you can only bring in a limited number of investors because the number of jobs you can create is limited. Okay, so in other words, when the investment goes through a regional center, it's not about the exact number of jobs created, but rather the total amount invested in the project, which implies creating a certain number of jobs. True, that makes it a lot more convenient and much simpler. And typically, they end up creating more jobs than are actually needed for the number of investors that they're working with. So it can give you a certain peace of mind and a kind of assurance that you're going to meet the requirements of the EB-5 program, that you're compliant with those requirements. Exactly, that you're compliant. And could you tell us what's the current minimum investment amount for the EB-5 program? The minimum investment is 800,000. This was increased in 2022. It hadn't been increased for 25 years. It used to be $500,000, but now it's 800. Just to add a quick note for our viewers, this program has been around since 1990, so it's been over 30 years. And just recently, a couple of years ago, they made some changes to it, right? That's right. Okay, good. I know that in the EB-5 program, there's actually two investment options. There's a minimum investment amount of 800,000, and there's another amount of 1,050,000. To be honest, I don't even usually bring up the second amount because I don't even know of any projects on the market for that amount right now. It's not a great option for investors. Why would they choose to invest 1 million when they can get a green card with an 800,000 investment? It's very hard for the 1,050,000 projects to compete with the 800,000 ones. That makes sense if you have the option to invest 250,000 less. Exactly. I also represent EB-5 projects, and when I have clients who want to set up the higher investment requirement, I tell them not to, because it'll be really tough to attract investors in that level. So you mean your law firm and you, as a lawyer, work not only with the investors but also with the EB-5 projects. You handle documents not only for investors but for the projects too. Yeah, exactly. So we have experience on both sides. And that allows us, for example, when investors come to us and they choose a project we don't work with, but we can still review all the documents and point out if there are any issues or whether the project meets all the program requirements. Okay, so it sounds like your firm has a lot of expert knowledge in this area. I think that's great, especially considering Greenberg-Trorig's experience. From my personal experience, I know that not all immigration firms in the US have Russian-speaking attorneys. Yeah, I am an immigrant in the US myself, as you can probably tell by my accent. But we've got a lot of people here at GD who speak Russian, and we work with a lot of Russian-speaking clients. Okay, that's awesome. Kate, could you explain what TEA and non-TEA status means? Again, I'd like to remind our viewers that in the EB-5 program, that there are two different investments amounts, and the lower one is tied to something called a TEA. Could you explain what that is? Sure. TEA stands for Targeted Employment Area and refers to zones where the unemployment rate represents 150% of the national average. If the project is a TEA, the minimum investment amount is 100,000. And if it's not in a TEA, then the required amount is 1,050,000. Also, T projects are guaranteed 10% of the available visas each year. Every year, the government allocates a certain number of EB-5 green cards. And if you apply for a TEA project, 10% of those visas are reserved for such projects. It's guaranteed. Right, the TEA projects. Okay, I've always been curious about something. So a TEA is an area with a high unemployment rate, right? So how is it then that many projects that are being built in places like, say, Miami or New York, these areas aren't exactly rural? How are they still considered TEA projects? Let's say you're building a condo project. It's not an area with high employment. It's a residential zone. So the unemployment rate would be high there, as not many people work in that area. For instance, I see. I live in Manhattan, New York, and in our area, each block can actually have a different TEA designation. So people think, well, Manhattan, there can't be any TEA zones there, but many projects do qualify. Okay, so even if the project is located, let's say, in a central area, it could still be classified as a TEA. That's right, got it. How long does it usually take to get the investors' documents ready? Let's say an investor comes to us today. So about how long would the project typically take? From the very moment they walk in to submitting their petition, how long will it take? Well, it really depends on the client. How quickly they provide the necessary paperwork to us, and how fast everything is translated into English. But typically, we can submit the petition to the immigration office within about a month to a month and a half. Right now, the processing time is very dependent on the project, but usually it takes about a year to a year and a half for EB-5 approval. When it's approved, if you're overseas, we can apply for an immigration visa through the embassy. In the Emirates, that would be in Abu Dhabi. But as I've mentioned before, the law has changed, and if you're already in the US, whether on a tourist visa or a student visa or work visa, we can apply for both the EB-5 and the green card at the same time. This speeds up the process since we can skip the second step. So, just to clarify, under those new EB-5 rules, a person now doesn't actually have to wait to get their green card approval. And if they're already in the US, when the petition is filed, they can start living and working in the US right away. That is right. When we apply for the green card while it's being reviewed, we also apply for a work and travel permit. You can even apply for EB-5 and then decide, well, I've spent 3 to 4 months in the Emirates, but I actually want to move to the US. And while the EB-5 is still being processed, we can also file for the green card when the person actually arrives in the US. Well, that's a pretty big change from how it was before. And compared to other immigration programs, even the European ones that are still available to Russians, that's definitely a tremendous advantage. Another advantage is that once you apply for the green card, even if you came as a tourist, you can already enroll your kids in school. That's not something you can do on a B1, B2 visa. That's a major advantage, since families usually relocate together. So, could you please tell us what the main documents are that an investor needs for the EB-5 program? You'll need to show the source of the investment funds. So all the documents related to the source of your funds are required. For EB-5, this could be income from employment, the sale of real estate, the sale of stocks, and I even had one client who made the money by winning a global poker tournament. Really? That's right. It can also be money from a divorce settlement or any other legitimate source. But you must prove the source of your funds and document all money transfers, from when it was earned to when it was invested. If the funds moved through different accounts, that's fine, but you've got to document that. And now we also have many Russian-speaking clients who use Bitcoin trades as the source of their funds. That's fine too, but you've got to provide all the appropriate documentation. So basically, the main requirement is that the movement of these funds is properly documented, right? Exactly. We'll also need your ID and civil documents, passports, birth certificates, marriage and divorce certificates, if applicable. All these documents need to be provided as well. Okay, and are there any other types of required documents? For instance, do you have to prove that you speak English or that you have a degree? No, those kinds of documents aren't required. No, only when you're applying for citizenship will you need to take an English test. But that's not required for the green card application. So, for the EB-5 program, there is no such requirement. That is great. And here is another common question that we get a lot. Many of our investors are business owners, and they do have the necessary capital to invest in the EB-5 program. However, those funds are not liquid. They're tied up in their business. So, rather than pulling capital from their operations, some business owners prefer to take out a loan from a financial institution. So, the question is, could someone get a loan from a bank and then use that money to invest in the EB-5 program. Yes, of course, with no restrictions. Absolutely. That's really convenient, such a huge advantage. We've got a lot of clients who invest this way, so they take out a loan from financial institutions. That's right, we have many investors who have their money tied up in their business or real estate. So they can invest a part of the amount to file the EB-5 petition, and then within a year, they can come up with the rest. Let's say they invest half, 400,000. Then they can come up with the other half later, maybe by selling a property or borrowing from a bank. Many regional centers now allow this approach, investing a portion to file, and then the rest, say, within a year, before the final decision on the petition is made. So you can get into the EB-5 program even if you don't have the full amount right away. Is that right? That's right. And for many investors, that's a great advantage. That's amazing. Now, what are the potential risks associated with the EB-5 program? This is not a guaranteed path, right? I mean, there's no real guarantee that the client will get the green card. Well, actually, there's no guarantee that the business will be successful. And in that sense, it's like any other investment. You don't know if it will be successful when you invest. That is one risk. Another risk is that the green card could be denied if you cannot provide all the necessary documentation. But to be honest, I usually don't take on cases like that from the start. Of course, there's no point in working on a green card case that's unlikely to be successful. You've got to be ready to show the source of your investment money. If you're not, we might need to explore another option. For example, if you can't prove your income, because it's from 20 years ago, maybe we could use the sale of your real estate instead. It's important to work with your attorney to determine the best strategy that will fit you. Unfortunately, if the client cannot provide the required documentation, the petition will be denied. Okay, just to clarify, did I get that right, that before you take on an EB-5 client, you have a preliminary consultation to see if they actually meet all the necessary qualifications for the EB-5 visa? For sure, I do these consultations, but also we collaborate with you, Dennis. You meet with the clients for those initial discussions even before we meet with them. And you've got vast experience in this area as well. We work together to help our clients achieve their goals. That's great. Yeah, it's true. We definitely do those initial consultations with our clients, and we always recommend they speak with an attorney before starting the actual filing process. It's not just about where the investment came from. Some clients may have had legal issues, criminal cases, or they may have worked for the government. All of this is very important and needs to be discussed with the lawyer. Yeah, that's an excellent point, by the way. I know you mentioned that the EB-5 program doesn't have any restrictions, and as long as someone isn't on a sanctions list, they're eligible. But what if an investor held a government position in the past or was a public official? Can they still participate in the EB-5 program in that case? They can, but we'd need to prove that they're not what's called a politically exposed person. Then we can take them on as a client. So there's no restrictions in that sense either. No restrictions. By the way, just this week, I actually got approval for 3 of my Russian clients, and one of them had actually worked for the government. It was over 20 years ago, though. But they approved him without any additional questions or what we call requests for evidence. That actually brings up another question I was going to ask. How is the immigration service treating Russian citizens now? Are there cases being reviewed fairly? And are there any examples of Russians being approved? Absolutely. Like I said, I got several approvals this week and last week too. We work with a lot of Russian clients and we're getting approvals all the time. And in some cases, they may ask for more information if they need it, but we help our clients put all the necessary documents together and send them over. But Russian cases are reviewed just like anybody else's. There's no issue with that. So there's no bias towards Russian cases. Not at all. That's fantastic. Kate, I have another question that has to do with clients from Russia. You see, right now, many Russian banks are under restrictions and can't transfer money directly anymore. They are basically cut from the world financial system. However, some Russian banks are still functioning. Can an investor transfer their funds from a Russian bank to an EB-5 program in the US? And will those funds be accepted in the US? That's a good question. Well, a lot will actually depend on the project and the bank they're working with. In the US. Yeah, in the US. So you'll need to confirm with the project that their bank will accept funds from Russia. But basically, this is not a legal issue. If the bank isn't sanctioned and the funds can be transferred, it's quite acceptable to the immigration service. But you still need to check with the US bank to see if they'll accept your funds. Because even though it's not prohibited, some banks just won't take it. I see, so it's basically on a case-by-case basis. Makes sense. Here's another common question that we get a lot. We work with several different law firms in the United States. And of course, we do prefer to work with your law firm. But it's not uncommon for our clients to say that they run into a situation where they rarely get to speak directly to the immigration lawyer. Most of the time, especially during the time where they put together and prepare the necessary documents, they end up dealing with assistants. And sometimes the communication can be really slow. Can you tell us how you handle that at your firm? How quickly do you respond to your clients? Well, I always answer. In fact, I give my clients my WhatsApp number so they can reach me on my cell at any time. Plus, I also travel to the client's location and meet with them in person. Also, we have a rule in the office that everyone who's working on a case must respond to any emails within 24 hours. So that way, no one has to wait long to speak to a lawyer or get an update on their case. That's really awesome. All right, moving on to the next question. I understand that with the EB-5 program, one petition based on a single investment doesn't just cover the principal investor. It can also include their spouse and any children under 21 if they're not married. That's great benefit for families looking to relocate together. And married children can be included. Right, and married children can be included in the petition. But what about other relatives, like siblings or parents? Can they be included? No, they can't. I see, so they'd have to file a separate petition. Yeah, they'd have to file separately. We have a case where a client from Afghanistan had 2 wives, and only one could be included because it's illegal to have multiple wives in the US. So the second wife would need to invest separately. That is right. Interesting. We've actually had clients who wanted to leave their second wife behind and come with just one. Okay, so let's say an investor gets their green card through the EB-5 program. Can they later reach out to your firm to sponsor the immigration of their relatives, like their parents? Absolutely. We do this all the time. Once someone gets their citizenship, they often want to bring their parents over. This process takes about a year, and of course, we can help with that. We also have investors who get married after they apply and then want to bring their spouse over. we can help them with that too. But in that case, it's going to be through the family reunification process, which is different from the EB-5 process. But in any case, your law firm handles that, right? Sure, we do more than just immigration law. Many investors who come here are already successful and want to start a business or buy real estate, and we can help with all that. That is something we do all the time. We also handle tax matters. That's really convenient. Yes, for wealthy individuals, before they get a green card, we advise them to set up tax structures and offshore trusts, and we can help with all of that. Great. By the way, when we work with clients, me and my colleagues and other companies, we often talk about the benefits of the EB-5 program and how great it is to get a green card and all the opportunities the green card can give you. But I've noticed that many companies don't mention the other side of those benefits, the responsibilities. So, what responsibilities will an investor have once they obtain their green card? What's it going to be? Well, aside from taxes, so they'll be subject to U.S. tax laws. Exactly, they'll be subject to the U.S. tax system. And that's why it's really important. Many lawyers don't talk about this because they're just immigration law firms. But we are a full-service firm, so we can help with tax structuring. It is also important to know that once you get your green card, you must spend at least 180 days per year in the U.S. But you can apply to stay abroad longer without losing your green card. This is called a re-entry permit, and it's valid for 2 years. Then you have to renew it. So we have clients who have been getting those re-entry permits for 15 and even 20 years. Oh, really? Yes, so I can have a green card but still live outside the US and I won't lose it. And you won't lose it. That's a great option. For sure, many people still have their businesses overseas, or their kids are studying abroad. Maybe they got into a university in the UK, so they need to stay there for a while. They can do that without losing their green card, but they have to get the re-entry permit. I get it. Okay, Kate, could you please take a moment to explain a little more about the EB-5 program? I know that it basically involves investments in certain commercial enterprises, and most people invest their money through regional centers. But I also understand that there's an option to start your own business under the EB-5 program to invest in your own business. So that brings up two important questions. First, what's the main difference between investing in your own business versus going through regional centers? And second, are there any specific industries or sectors where you can really start your own business that would qualify for the EB-5 program? Could you tell us about that? You can start any type of business under EB-5, but the requirement is that you have to create 10 jobs. And those jobs must be for Americans, not for the investor or their family. At least not until they get their own legal status. What this means is that the jobs have to be for U.S. citizens, green cards holders, or people who have been granted political asylum. And importantly, these 10 employees must work at least 35 hours a week, which is what we call full-time employment. Any type of business can qualify, but what you need to understand here is that if you invest through Regional Center, they'll take care of all the investment-related matters. In that case, you're essentially what we call a passive investor. But if it's your own business, you need to be actively involved and demonstrate that you're actually running it on a daily basis. Of course, you can hire managers and you can have other stuff, but there must be clear evidence that you're actively involved in the business and all the business matters. And it must be successful. But when it comes to regional centers, you see, these are large companies. These are developers, and they have a lot of experience with these projects. When choosing regional centers to work with, many investors look at their track record, how many EB-5 projects they've done, and how good they are at selecting and executing these projects. Now, if you're starting your own business in a new country, that is always a challenge. You're new to the US, and maybe you want to start the same business you had back home, or maybe you've never run a business before. But you see, your migration status will be tied to the success of that business. And if something goes wrong with it, you risk losing your status and your green card. This is because you have to create those 10 jobs within 2 years after your petition is approved. So you're essentially committing to a 4 to 5 year cycle overall. Yeah, so what that means is that investing through regional centers is clearly a much safer and a much easier route for investors participating in the EB-5 program. Absolutely. In fact, about 97 of all EB-5 petitions are actually done through the regional centers. Got it, through the regional centers. But just to clarify something, and I'm trying to be objective here, going through a regional center still doesn't actually guarantee that everything's going to be okay with the investor's money, right? Have there been cases in the history of the EB-5 program where even if somebody invested through a regional center, they ended up losing all their money? Yeah, there have been cases like that, but I wouldn't say there have been many. It does happen, but even if the business doesn't succeed, as long as they can show that they made a genuine effort to follow through with the business plan they presented, you mean the regional center? Sure, the regional center, but also the specific project. If they can show that they spent the money as planned, but maybe ran into some issues, like not being able to secure additional financing or delays in construction, then yes, the investor could lose money but still get their green card. Really? That's right. Okay, so even in that case, they don't lose their green card at least. That's right. Got it. Now, let's talk about the regional centers. When it comes to participating in the EB-5 program through regional centers, what should investors keep in mind? Okay, so they've already got an immigration lawyer, and they've reached out to you and prepared their whole document package with your help and with the help of our company. But the next step is choosing an investment project and a regional center. And right now, I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but I know there are over 1,000 officially registered regional centers in the US. And each regional center can have several different projects. So how can investors make sure they don't get lost in all that variety? How do they choose a good, reliable project? When it comes to regional centers, just because they're approved as a regional center doesn't necessarily mean they're experienced or successful in this area. A lot of companies have the license, but they never really used it. So first of all, you need to ask about their experience with the EB-5 program. How many projects have they done under their license? How many were successful? What stage are those projects at? And what's their size? If this is their first time raising 150 million for a project, but before that, they only did 10 million projects, how do we know that they can raise that amount of money? I would also ask who they're working with on corporate securities and immigration matters, as there are different lawyers involved when setting up an EB-5 project. You mean ask the regional centers who they're working with? Exactly. If the lawyer they're using doesn't have any experience with EB-5 cases, they might draft the documents in a way that could cause the petition to be denied. I'd also want to know what developers they're working with and what kind of experience those developers have. What other financing do they have aside from EB-5 to complete the project? Do they have bank financing? Have they invested their own capital? It's important to find this out. Where do they operate? What part of the country? Is this a TEA project or not? We've talked about those already. So when an investor comes to you, they're not just getting legal advice on immigration, but they can also get advice on the project they've chosen. That's right. We do full due diligence on the project and give the investor our advice. If we see any potential risks or red flags, we let them know. Of course, the final decision is up to them, but we thoroughly review everything and explain it in detail. And could an investor reach out to your firm for recommendations on specific EB-5 projects? Well, we don't really make recommendations, but we can tell you what projects we have experience with and where investors have had success. Some projects have already been reviewed and approved by immigration authorities. It is called Form 956, and it gives investors some peace of mind knowing they're choosing a project that has already been vetted and approved by immigration. You mean specifically approved for the EB-5 program? Does that mean that the investor's petition for their particular project is likely to go through? Well, as long as they can prove the source of their funds, then yes. I see, okay. Also, the petition will be processed faster since the project has already been approved. So now they just need to verify the investor's documents. That's all. Right, that's a good point. And if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, under the new EB-5 legislation, the maximum processing time for the petition is supposed to be capped at no more than 270 days, I believe. And I've heard from other immigration attorneys that there are cases where investors' petitions were actually approved just a few months after filing. Is that correct? Is that possible? Yep, that's correct. What affects the speed? If the project had already been approved and received what we call an I-956 approval, then all they have to do is to verify the source of funds. We've seen cases where investors were approved within 2 to 3 months of filing. So if I submit my documents for the EB-5 program today and the project is already approved and all my paperwork is in order, I could potentially get approval in just a few months. Is that right? Yeah, it's true. We've had clients who got approved so fast. They weren't ready for the next step, applying for the immigrant visa at the embassy, because they were still working or their kids were still in school. So they put it off, which, by the way, you can do. Some clients file the I-256 and get their EB-5 petition approved, but they're not ready to apply for the immigrant visa right away. Meaning they can come to the US later, of course, and you can help with that. Definitely, we can help them postpone the process. So what happens to the investor's documents after their petition is approved by the immigration authorities? What is the next step? The next step is that USCIS transfers the documents to another agency called the National Visa Center, or NVC for short. When the NVC gets the documents, which usually takes about 2 or 3 months, they send us an invoice, and we need to pay for the investor and their family. That's the visa fees, right? Exactly, the visa fees. After that, they ask us to submit personal documents that I've mentioned earlier, birth certificates, marriage certificates, and a medical form showing that they've had their vaccinations. We need to provide details about where the investor and their family have lived and worked, their basic biographical data. We send that through the online portal. Next, the NVC sends the case file over to the US Embassy where the investor lives. So, if they're based in the UAE, it would be sent to Abu Dhabi. Yeah. But if they have residency in more than one country, they can actually choose where they want to complete the process. After that, the investor and their family are scheduled for an interview. The interview usually lasts 10 to 15 minutes. and then they get their passport with the immigrant visa. It is valid for 6 months, and during those 6 months, the investor and their family must enter the US. That initial entry marks the start of their green card or permanent resident status. It's valid for 2 years and is called a conditional green card. Could you explain what that means? What's the difference between a permanent green card and a conditional one? Well, there's not much difference, really. They're basically the same. You have the same rights. You can work and you can travel freely in and out of the US. The key difference is that a conditional green card is only valid for 2 years. After that, we file what's called Form I-829. Here we have to show that you invested the capital, didn't withdraw it too early, and that the project created the required jobs. While your I-829 is being processed, your rights to work, your right to travel and live in the US are all extended. Once it's approved, you can move forward with applying for US citizenship. Great! And when can the investor expect to get their money back? That's a good question, but I don't have an exact answer because it depends on the project. In 2022, they changed the law. Previously, you had to keep the money in the project until you filed the I-829 form, until the conditional status was removed. Yeah, exactly. But now the law says the money has to stay in the project for at least 2 years. And after that, it depends on the project. Most projects need the money for more than 2 years, sometimes 3, 4, 5 years, or even longer. So if someone's considering investing, they should discuss it with the project team. So am I correct in understanding that, theoretically, if a project is ready to return the funds 2 years after the client gets their green card, they can get their money back then? That is right. Great. And could you explain why the returns of the EB-5 projects tend to be so low? I get this question all the time. I know there are some objective reasons for it, and I know the answer. But I'd like to hear your perspective as an immigration attorney. Well, it's not really a legal issue. The Immigration Service just wants it to be a for-profit project, meaning there has to be some income. But how much income, that's not really a legal matter. So it really depends on the specific project. To be honest, setting up an EB-5 program is a lot of work for the project team. They have to hire lawyers, business plan writers, economists. It costs them a lot of money to set it all up. So I think the part of the reason they don't offer high returns is that they have a lot of expenses to cover. They're covering their costs. Exactly. So what happens to the investor and what happens to the investor's money if, for some reason, the petition is denied? What if they get turned down? And what are the reasons why their petition might be denied? The petition can be denied if the investor didn't provide enough documentation to show the Immigration Service where they got their money or how the funds were transferred. They can also deny it because of the project. For instance, if the project doesn't have its papers in order. That's why it is important to work with the experienced lawyer who will review the project and its documents. And with an experienced project team, too. Petition can also be denied if the investor has a criminal record or if they are under sanctions but still tried to apply for EB-5. In those cases, it will be denied. If the petition is denied, the project is supposed to return the investor's money. However, when they actually return it depends on the project. When you sign the subscription agreement with the project, you should pay close attention to that section. The refund clause. Exactly. Some projects issue refunds right away, while others will refund after a certain period of time, like 60 or 90 days. Some projects say they'll refund your money when they find another investor to take your place, but if they're not actively marketing, then you'll be waiting for a while. Exactly, you'll have to wait. So every project handles refunds differently, and you have to check with them. Understood. Are there any tools or ways to appeal this? I mean, if your petition gets rejected, can you file an appeal? Absolutely. Sometimes we believe the petition was wrongly denied, and in that case, we can file an appeal. There's a division within the Immigration Service called the Administrative Appeals Office, or AAO, and that's where we file the appeal. Okay, here is another question for you. It's not very common, but it does come up from time to time. Is it possible for an investor to withdraw from the EB-5 program after they've already submitted their documents? For example, if their circumstances change, would that have any immigration consequences? Could it make it harder for them to get approved for other visas? No, it won't have any consequences. In fact, I can tell you that we've had some people who have gone through the EB-5 program, got their green card, and then later decided to give it up. And we've even had people who got their citizenship and then gave it up. And they can still get other visas after that, so no problem there. Okay, that's good to know. Kate, I don't really have many more questions left, but I wanted to ask you about some of the potential pitfalls that investors might run into. Is there anything in particular that they should know before they start the program, or while they're going through it? What could make it harder or more complicated for investors to take part in the EB-5 program? I think it's really important to do your own research of the original center and the project. And don't just look at their experience. Also check if there were any criminal cases or investigations. Remember, this isn't just an immigration matter. The program is also monitored by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Some regional centers may have made mistakes or broken rules, and that's something you need to look into carefully. For example, if the CEC finds that they're mismanaging their marketing or compensating brokers improperly, they could shut the project down. So it's very important to examine this closely and, of course, talk to your lawyer. Okay, got it. And if you could, I'd also like to add that it's important to know who's involved in the project. I mean, who owns it? Who the developer is? Have they had any bankruptcies? Have they had any criminal issues? Have they successfully completed any other projects before, not just the EB-5 projects? Right. So the documents that an investor gets from the regional center, do they include something like a private placement memorandum, a PPM? That is the document that's supposed to outline all the risks, and it should also provide background on the developers, and so on, right? Exactly. The PPM is supposed to be a comprehensive document that outlines all the risks, so it's important to study it carefully. Sometimes, though, PPMs are done poorly, and that's pretty obvious when you see only a few risks listed, like just 2 or 3 or 4, and that's it. So that just tells you that the lawyer who drafted this PPM isn't great, and that you might want to ask more questions. So another criteria that an investor could use to choose a project could be the law firm that prepared all these documents for the project, right? So it would be a good idea for the investor to check who the lawyers are that are working on the project. Yeah, definitely. We've seen some project cases where smaller developers, those who are new to construction or new to the EB-5 program, hire local attorneys. They may be handling other legal matters for them. They may even be corporate attorneys, but they have no experience with the EB-5 or preparing PPMs, because that's the securities law, and they just wouldn't know how to draft these documents properly. Okay, I see. Kate, so besides picking the right immigration project, investors also face the challenge of choosing the right immigration attorney. And since we've been working with you naturally, we recommend you and your firm. In fact, I should also mention that we actually have a formal agreement with you, unlike other law firms. This agreement allows us to work with investors. We can accept their documents. And I can say that we basically represent GT in the Middle East and CIS countries. But still, what piece of advice would you give for choosing the right immigration lawyer for the EB-5 program? Well, I'd want to know how many petitions they filed, how many were approved, and how many years of experience they have in this field. Also, have they worked with other investors from your country? Because when it comes to EB-5 filings, every country has its own unique challenges. So there are a lot of specific aspects. Right, for example, I work with a lot of clients from China and Vietnam, and they can't easily transfer money overseas. So if a lawyer doesn't have experience with those countries, they might structure the petition incorrectly. The same goes for investors from Russia and the former CIS countries. You need a lawyer who understands the specific tax documents and financial rules in those places to make sure the petition is filed properly and that the investor and their family can get their green cards. Right. And what do immigration lawyers in the US typically charge for their services these days? Well, I can't really speak for everyone, but I can give you a general idea. It also depends on the size of the family, but it's usually about 25,000. That's per petition, right? Yes, per petition. On top of that, there's the immigration service filing fee for each petition. Starting April the 1st, that fee is going up to over 10,000 for each I-5 to 6, which is the EB-5 petition. And that's a government fee, right? So the investor still has to pay it anyway. Exactly. The investors should also be ready to have all their documents translated. So this is an additional cost they'll need to budget for. Do you ask for the full payment from the investor upfront, or would it be possible, let's say, to pay in installments? Yeah, we take installment payments because there's 3 stages. So it doesn't really make sense to take the full amount upfront. We take the first payment to start the process. When the EB-5 is approved, then we move on to the second stage. And then, when the investor gets their conditional resident status, they have their initial green card. And when they're already toward the end of that period, and we are ready to apply for the permanent green card, then we take the third payment. Well, Kate, I just have one more question for you. Let's say we have an investor sitting in front of us. What do they need to do to start this process? For example, let's say the investor lives in the United Arab Emirates, or they are in Turkey or Russia. Where should they go to kickstart the process? Well, they should first get in touch with you, Dennis. They should have an initial consultation with you and find out more about the program. If they decide they want to move forward, we will set up a consultation via Zoom, phone, or even in person. Whatever works best for them. During that consultation, we can answer all their questions, explain the process, go over the documents needed, and also discuss the source of their funds, what's acceptable and what's not. And all of this is done free of charge, right? Of course. Yeah, we don't charge our clients for this, and your firm doesn't either. That is correct? Excellent. Kate, thank you so much for your time and for taking this opportunity to meet with me. I know you're on your way to Saudi Arabia right now. And I also know that you visit the UAE quite often. So I was wondering, since there's a pretty large community here from the CIS countries, would it be possible to meet with you here in person from time to time? What do you think about it? Yes, absolutely. I'll be back here in May, and I'd be happy to meet with the clients. That's perfect. Thanks again, Kate. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and answer all of our questions. We'll definitely stay in touch with you. And to our viewers and potential investors, please don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions about the EB-5 program or how to get started. We work with amazing, highly professional immigration attorneys, and we're always happy to help and answer any questions that you may have. So be sure to follow us on social media, stay up to date with our latest news, and feel free to contact us anytime. Thank you.